Hi everyone. Today I'm going to be doing another top 10 list. This is about words and topics that make me want to buy or pick up a book, and it is based off of a blog post which I originally published on the 25th of February 2014, and it was from the very long running top 10 Tuesday blog hop, which is about people just like different sorts of all sorts of topics related to books and reading and stuff like that. And so anyway, number 1 is Japan. I would love to find or read more Japanese historicals or contemporaries. I've been an Niponophile since I was 14 and plan to write some Japanese historicals once my queue is finally empty or simmering down. And in 2019, I wrote a short story for the Insecure Writers Support Group Anthology short story contest that year, and it was middle grade historical fantasy, and I set it in Nara era Japan in the year 737, the last year of a really terrible, tragic, just like awful smallpox epidemic. And I would love to get back to that story someday and flesh it out into a full-length book. I just love just about everything about Japanese history and culture and literature and language. And if you are curious, I call myself a Niponophile instead of a Japanophile, because this might make me sound like pretentious or snobby or holier than thou or whatever, but I just feel it kind of distinguishes me from these sorry not sorry like overgrown toddlers who are just obsessed with anime. But like that's a whole rant for a whole other topic. And so number 2, Japan's very close neighbor, China. I have always enjoyed Chinese historicals when I've read them, though I have read even fewer Chinese historicals than Japanese, which I do hope to rectify at some point. There is so much territory to mine, not just in terms of era, but types of people. If you weren't already aware of this, the Han Chinese are the majority Chinese ethnic group, but there are many other like ethnic groups within China, and they all speak all sorts of different languages, not necessarily by ethnic group, but just like the region of the country or sometimes even the city. And it's just absolutely really fascinating. Like China is not, monolithic. I know many Westerners have this attitude, oh, they all look the same, and so the Chinese language must all be the same too. But no, they have so much diverse cultures and history within that like one giant country. You might be surprised. And so I would also love to read something about non-Chinese in China, like, for example, the French, Russians, Jewish refugees, British, or Americans who formed much of Shanghai's population until the 1949 revolution, or a missionary family in the 19th or early 20th century. And I know some people these days would be like, oh, why would you want to read about non-Chinese in China? That's not diverse enough, and that's, colonization or whatever. But like, seriously, this is actual history. Like it or not, those other ethnic groups really did live in China, and sometimes they formed large majorities. Like, for example, the foreign concessions in Shanghai, like the French and the British and all the Jewish refugees and such, and the Russian refugees who came after the Civil War, and just other people who came to China, they did live there, and they all like formed together this like really interesting melting pot. So you really can't tell the story of many countries all around the world without telling the story of people who were not, ethnic natives of that region. Just some people just need to get over there. Oh, this can only be about this or that, or it's not like properly diverse enough, where you're just like need to decolonize your frickin' bookshelf. But rant over. Number 3, Immigrant Stories. I love books about new or recent immigrants to the US, either historical or contemporary. With a contemporary, one is also more likely to find a new story, like about immigrants from India, Iraq, or Ghana, versus like the standard old. I mean, not that there's anything wrong with that, of course, or not that you can't have an original angle, but pretty much everyone is familiar with stories about immigrants from, let's say, Poland or Sweden or Germany or Ireland or stuff like that. And so we don't really see enough of these stories about immigrants who came to the US after the disgusting like emergency immigration quota was thankfully finally repealed in 1964, and people from outside of Western Europe, and particularly from like basically there was a near total ban on Asian immigration for so long, and then finally we would have people coming from all sorts of places around in Asia and Africa and Latin America to the United States. So it was no longer just the story of, like the people from various places in Europe coming. And it would also be a nice change of pace to read a story about immigrants to a place like Canada, England, or Australia, to name just a few. Not all immigrants came to America. In my late teens, I devoured Maisie Moscow's 5-book family saga, Almonds and Raisins, about 2 Jewish families, one Austrian and rather secular, one Russian and very religious, who come to Manchester, England around 1905, and I would absolutely highly recommend these books. So many years after reading them, I still remember so many details. Like, for example, I was so angry at the matriarch Sarah of the Russian family because she was totally meddling in her children's love lives and making happy couples break up because, oh, this marriage would be more advantageous for you, and that really can't be the person for you. Oh, marry someone you don't love because we have to bring our families together. Like, seriously, I really, really did not like that character after she started meddling in all of her children's love lives. Like, ugh. Also, bonus points if a U.S. immigrant story is not set in New York City. As much as I love reading about historical New York, when normal people could still afford to live there, and they could have their pick of fairly spacious apartments or townhouses to raise their families instead of being squeezed into like not even 200 square foot boxes that started their life as closets. Like, even prison cells are more spacious than that. But New York was not the only city immigrants settled in. How about, let's say, Pittsburgh, my native city, Boston, one of my absolute favorite cities I have ever been to, Cincinnati, San Francisco, a small Midwestern farming community, or Chicago. Number 4, Russia. Pretty self-explanatory if you don't know. I've been a huge Russophile since 1992, in December, around the time I was turning 13. That's one of my absolute greatest passions. I love Russian culture and literature and language and just pretty much everything about the culture and the history, although obviously, of course, I completely condemned Tsar Vladimir's genocidal war against the Ukrainian people. I hope that fascist dictator, he finally gets, deposed and they finally, get someone who's much, much better to rule the country. Number 5, Iran. I had a reawakened new interest in Iranian history and culture after putting some of the characters in my book Journey Through a Dark Forest, which is the 3rd book in my family saga about my characters who are originally from Russia, and I published the Journey Through a Dark Forest in 4 volumes because it was like so long even by my standards. And so anyway, I put some of those characters in Iran to escape the Great Terror, and they live in Isfahan and Fereydun Shah, which are like very, very close to one another, and they're like absolutely wonderful, like historical places in Iran, full of like wonderful culture and history. It's sad how many people don't realize Iran was a very modern, Western, secular country until the 1979 revolution. And again, many people don't realize like they're judging Iranians by the modern like mullahs in charge, and they don't realize like most ordinary Iranians are nothing like that. They want freedom. They've been like protesting in the streets since last year, and for several years before that, again, they were also protesting. They want to return to the pre-revolution era when like women did not have to go out veiled all the time, and there were much more like freedoms and liberation for women, and it wasn't like, oh, the West is horrible, like you can't do this and you can't do that, and like 1,000 lashes if you're caught even looking at a member of the opposite sex you're not related to and you're close to the same age, and we're gonna like punish you and like, hang you for all these like so-called trumped up offenses. And most Iranians, they like Westerners. They're not like hating everybody, and they're very hospitable. But you really should not believe these like stupid stereotypes and propaganda, because most normal Iranians, they have always been like the best of their history and their people and their culture. They're not at all like these like Islamic nut jobs who are just really, really ruining the perception of this beautiful like ancient country for so much of the world. Number 6, sisters. I always loved stories of sisters growing up, like The Little House and the All of a Kind family series. It's probably one of the reasons why I tend to make my own sibling lineups in my books predominantly female. It's a refreshing change of pace to read about family relationships instead of books where family is a minor detail, but I did revisit the All of a Kind family series by Sydney Taylor maybe like 10 or so years ago, and then I much later read Ella of All of a Kind Family, which was the last book in the series. Apparently Mrs. Taylor was planning to do this for all of the sisters, write a book about her, like growing up and finding her husband and stuff, but sadly she passed away, so she only got to do Ella, the first sister, and that was also her own real-life oldest sister's name. She did name the 5 sisters in the book after herself and her sisters. She was Sarah, the real-life, I believe, middle sister, and there's been a few years ago, there was a wonderful biography published about her. I read the opening pages on the Amazon preview, and I would love to get to read all of the book. But one thing I really didn't like about the end of the first book in the All of a Kind family series, it's, sorry if I'm speaking too fast, set in the Lower East Side in the aughts of the 20th century, and there's like the 5 sisters, and then Mama is pregnant, and oh, what a surprise, she finally gets a boy. But that did happen in real life, but in real life, which isn't depicted entirely in the books. And Mama is pregnant again at the end of Ella of All of a Kind Family, and she had another boy, and then they had, after that book ended in real life, she had another boy. So there were eventually like 5 girls and 3 boys. But I really, really hated the way the girls just like happily, matter of factly, nonchalantly accept their new second class citizenship after Papa finally gets his precious golden male heir. He acts like he won the damn lottery when he like realizes he got a little boy, and they're like, oh, Charlie deserves his own clothes and brand new toys because he's a boy and we're just like silly little girls. Like, ugh, I just really, really hated that. It just made me sad. They're like, oh, we're just girls, we're second class citizens, but oh, the boy, he's the golden heir. And then the other books, you also see them treating Charlie like the freaking king of the household. I just like hate when that happens in a family that had all girls, and oh, suddenly the golden boy is born. Oh, the boy, we must worship the boy at all times, just like treat him like, oh, with kid glove. But I know, I'm sorry, that's a rant for another video. Number 7, the early post-World War II years. So many books about the Shoah or the World War II home front stop at or soon after the liberation, when a story that was at least as dramatic and compelling was just beginning. And also, of course, World War II itself, that's like one of my areas of historical expertise, and I've read and own so many memoirs about that era, so of course that makes me want to pick up books about the subject. But, contrary to what some people believe, I do not think all books about, the Holocaust or World War II, be either, memoirs or fiction, are like automatically awesome. I've, been totally unafraid to rip into a couple of them that just like I felt they were not badly written or just weak or underdeveloped and stuff. Particularly Sorry Not Sorry, the freaking book thief. I cannot wait to rip that book apart in a future video. Number 8, Lefthandedness. I'm a sinister chauvinist, as I like to call myself, and always include at least a few lefties or people who are ambidextrous among my cast of characters. I get a special thrill when I encounter someone else's fictional lefties whose handedness isn't just a minor detail. And that's one of my like trademarks and Easter eggs in books, like left-handed characters, and sometimes like frequently the left-handedness will run in families. And also particularly of interest to me is creating someone who is a switched, the opposite. Usually it was historically, unfortunately, lefties were shamed and bullied and even, God forbid, like beaten by teachers and parents and stuff to out of their natural inclination. Oh, why would you want to read or like write or eat or do anything with your left hand? Oh, we're going to move the pencil into your right hand. Like, I was like so sad when I was reading A Tree Grows in Brooklyn. Francie started out as a left-handed person, but her mother's like, oh, you have to write with your right hand when you go to school. Oh, I'm going to keep putting your fork in your right hand. Oh, and you have to learn how to write with a pencil in your right hand because, oh, God forbid you be left-handed. No, you have to do everything with your right hand. Right-handedness is the absolute norm. It just makes me so sad, the fate of so many lefties throughout history, which is particularly special to me doing left-handed characters in my historicals who are like strong enough to stay true to their inclination. They stand up to teachers, or even if they live like in an era like, for example, the 18th or 19th century when it really wasn't like possible, like they would be like forced to switch with their right hand at school all the time because they'd get, rapped on the knuckles if the teacher caught them writing with their left hand, or at home if, oh no, you're eating with your left hand, you got to do it with your right hand or you'll get punished. Like, so for example, these lefties might still like secretly write with their left hand in a diary or something, or letters, or just like drawing and painting and stuff at home, so they'll like stay true to their left-handedness in some way. And again, something, as I was mentioning before I got off on this like rambling tangent, I really do enjoy creating characters who like started out as right-handed, but like an injury or amputation or something like that forced them to switch to using their left hand as their dominant arm. That's just like really, really one of my areas of like special interest and expertise, the science and the history of handedness. Perhaps I could do a video about that at some point in future if enough people are interested in that. Number 9, Armenia or Armenians. I have been an Armenophile since the spring of '95. When I was 15 years old, I get so excited when I find historical fiction, memoirs, or nonfiction about the Armenian experience. And I know this is a very important subject. We need as many memoirs and nonfiction books about this as possible, but you should try to think outside of the Armenian genocide. Yeah, it was a tragic, defining experience, and like one of the things I like, one of the hills I will die in, and I will instablock people on Twitter, is if they are denying the Armenian genocide. That's like, no, this is a well-documented historical event. If you deny that, you're no friend of mine, and I'm just going to block you because you're just like an absolutely like repugnant person. How could you like deny this happened? But there are just so many other things throughout Armenian history that you could find to write about, like, for example, the Armenian diaspora community in Persia, or just like Armenian immigrants to the United States or other parts of the world, or just like golden age of Armenia and the Middle Ages, or just like so many other wonderful things. Just think outside of like tragedy and like try to write a little bit more about like triumph and happy times in the Armenian people's history. Number 10, art and artists. I'm an amateur artist, and I love finding stories about other amateur artists or serious professionals and art students. Bonus points if we share some of our favorite artists, like Paul Klee, my birthday buddy. He was born exactly a century before I was, Egon Schiele, Pablo Picasso, or Gustav Klimt. And because 11 is my lucky number, again, I will add one more to the list, a classic Bildungsroman, which is, the coming of age novel. It's not just like a short period in the character's life. It's just like following him or her throughout the entire journey from like, early childhood through like preteenhood, adolescence, being a teenager into young adulthood, sometimes even far into like, serious like older adulthood, like, the 30s or example. And so the story, the plot line is the, coming of age and the journey through life. It's not just about, oh, this is happening and this is a point A to point Z plot centric book. But I just really love that languorous, just like low, like slow, like just like laid back journey throughout life, and particularly if it's set against the backdrop of history, and just like seeing the character develop and just grow and become a different person, like maybe like make choices about like religion or politics, or just come to new understandings about things, and just working on relationships with people in his or her life. It's just one of many things that makes me absolutely love the Bildungsroman, and why I have chosen it for so many of my own books. I just, one of so many things about this genre, and it makes me kind of sad we don't really see it anymore. People are all about, oh, race to point A to point B, and it has to be like fast, quick, plot centric and stuff like that. So anyway, thank you guys very much for watching, and please, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing. I really, really do enjoy seeing comments from you guys, and I will see you again very soon. Thanks again for watching. Bye.